Hi and welcome back. So this video is all about integrated analysis. Today we're going to talk about how to merge your qualitative and your quantitative data to identify 5 major findings or themes. We're going to focus on the big 3 C's today, so that's comparing, contrasting, and combining. Then we'll talk about developing recommendations for practice based upon those big 5 themes. And we'll focus on focus, action, resources, outcomes, and collaboration. So the purpose of our integrated analysis is to compare, contrast, and combine our quantitative and qualitative data that we're collecting from our program evaluation tools. So that's looking across our multiple questions and our items and responses that we've gotten from our practitioners in order to create a cohesive explanation that helps describe 5 major themes from our data related to how these evidence-based practices are happening, how effective they are, and what needs to happen to make them better. So our integrated analysis for this class is going to focus domain by domain, looking first at our quantitative information and then our qualitative information to compare, contrast, and combine these 2 sources to make a major theme from our data. In looking at our first domain, the first thing we want to do is look at the results where we've identified from our ranking questions the highest and lowest evidence-based practices overall. So that's how often they're happening and how effective they are when they're happening. Then we're going to look at our results from our multi-grid rank questions. So that's where we've identified our areas of strength and need. So not just the highest and lowest practices, but what are the specific groups of practices that are identified as a strong point, and where is there a need for more attention, growth, and development. Then we're going to look at our cross-tabulation results where we've identified information about specific practices for specific groups. So maybe at this part, we're looking at one group, let's say teachers, and how they implement a specific evidence-based practice, maybe for this example, a particular type of transition assessment as compared to transition specialists or your general education teachers or your agency staff or job coaches, right? So we're looking at how one group compared to the other groups. And then in keeping with this idea of group comparison, we finally want to look at our results for domain 1 in terms of what evidence-based practices are happening and how often for our group comparison results from our Mann-Whitney U-test. That's where we identified which group has a statistically significantly greater need than the others for a specific evidence-based practice. So once we've looked at all of our quantitative information, our ranking questions, multiple ranking grids, cross-tabulations, and our Mann-Whitney U-test results, the next thing we want to do is look at our qualitative codes, so our major and our subcodes. So those could be literature codes from our evidence-based practice literature. They might be descriptive codes or in vivo codes. And our goal here is to look at qualitative information that helps us to understand the lived experience behind those lowest and highest ranked practices, those areas of strength and need, what practices specific groups are doing more or less often than each other, and then those areas of specific need that our Mann-Whitney U-test had said exist for a specific group compared to other groups. So maybe our results said that teachers are lacking a particular skill significantly more than another group. So we want to look at qualitative information where we try to find if teachers are talking about that need. Maybe they're saying that they need professional development, or they're saying that this is a struggle for them or something they want to work on. So this process that I just described is going to happen for domain 1, but also domains 2 and 3. Once we've gone through these 3 domains, we're going to focus on domain 4, which is all of our qualitative information from those open response questions at the end of our program evaluation tool. This is where we ask for recommendations and insight into those lived experiences about where their professional development is right now, what opportunities they have for training, and what they need to happen in terms of making them more skilled, knowledgeable, prepared to do these evidence-based practices. So this is question 11 and 12 on your program evaluation tool. And what we're going to do is look again into our qualitative data for major and minor codes that help us to explain what these needs in practice are. So specifically, what are practitioners saying they're getting right now in terms of professional development, and what do they still need? What are areas that they feel like are not supported? What are areas that they feel like they are really strong in right now, because we want to understand both sides of that coin, right? So from the qualitative information, what they're doing really well, what those major and those subcodes say is a really big strength in terms of current training, but also what are those areas that haven't been hit on in training? And the reason for that is we want to first focus on what works really well. So then in your recommendations for practice, you can capitalize on what's already working well to create new learning opportunities for these practitioners or stakeholders. So your integrated analysis table, which is section 2.4 of your Action Research Organizer, is where you're really going to get your hands dirty in terms of doing this analysis, is comparing, contrasting, and combining of your qualitative and your quantitative information. This is where your integrated analysis will focus on identifying those major themes and explaining those in clear and succinct detail about what that lived experience looks like behind the theme. So your major themes can either be one or some of those 4 domains we were just talking about on our previous slide, or they can be major themes identified through comparing, contrasting, and combining your results. So you might focus on what's happening and how effective it is, but you may have had some additional major themes that came out in your data that you were unexpected. And you might want to include one of these rather than having a section on a comparison between groups. On the flip side, maybe the comparison between groups was a really big aspect of your study, and you were really interested in understanding how evidence-based practices are happening between these 2 practitioner groups. Well, then maybe that's one of your major themes above and beyond these 4 domains that we've just talked about. So here's an example of an integrated analysis that follows this step-by-step process we just talked about and walked through. In this example here, I have a Likert or ranking question that ranks how often one specific evidence-based practice occurs. In this case, in this example, it's a transition assessment. I also have results from a multi-grid ranking question that has assessed practitioner ability to incorporate these multiple types of assessment into the curriculum as they support student growth towards transition-related goals. So here we have how often something is happening, and then specifically when it's happening, what does it look like? So what's being done? And even more specifically, how well are they able to do that? So in this idea of integrated analysis, the first thing we want to do here is look at our Likert question and look across those 4 different ranking possibilities. So daily, weekly, monthly, and annually. And we can see here that we've got 34 responses, which is far more responses than our weekly and our annually. So we're looking monthly is our most often our highest ranked option. So that tells us that transition assessments to monitor student progress towards their transition goals in this example is most often happening on a monthly basis. So we're saying, okay, transition assessment is happening on a monthly basis here. That's what in this example teachers have said. Now let's head over to our multi-grid ranking. And remember, what we want to do is look for those big areas of need. So we're looking for the largest gaps between our expert and our intermediate and our novice. So we want to see the lowest amount of expert and intermediate and the highest amount of novice ratings for these. So you see really this whole area here. So that's aptitude tests, interest inventories, intelligence test, personality and preference assessments, and even to some degree adaptive behavior assessments. This is a large area of need for stakeholders in terms of they're saying that they perceive this these particular types of assessment for them to be a novice at implementing this, specifically incorporating those types of assessments into the general curriculum to support student growth towards their transition-related goals. We also see a smaller area of need in relation to job evaluations and self-determination assessments. So taken together, now we know that when they're using transition assessments, it's happening on a monthly basis. And then in terms of the transition assessments they use, their highest level of knowledge or skill in terms of achievement tests and adaptive behavior assessments, which wouldn't surprise us. And the greatest area of need in terms of these more transition-specific assessments that we might consider as part of our best practices or evidence-based practices for age-appropriate transition assessment. So taken together, now we have an understanding of when transition assessment happens and then the types of assessments that are happening when it does happen, and even more important, when they're doing these, how prepared are they to implement these strategies and these evidence-based practices. So in this example here, this might be all of the quantitative information that I have. And honestly, that's a lot of quantitative information for this particular evidence-based practice. This is great. So now what we want to do is look at our qualitative information to help us understand the lived experience that teachers are having, at least in this example, about when they're implementing these particular evidence-based practices related to transition assessment. So what we really want to know here is when practitioners, and so in this example, teachers are using aptitude tests, interest inventories, and intelligence tests, or job evaluations, self-determination assessments to support student progress towards transition goals within the general curriculum. What we want to look for in our qualitative information then is examples of if they're explaining what this looks like, their challenges with it, if they're talking about this being a need for training and what that training might look like. So in my final example here, you see that I have incorporated both this information about that lived experience and the quantitative information. Format-wise, what I want to do is first talk about my bar chart, and then my multiple ranking grid, and then my qualitative information that explains those. And remember that we're pulling from our major codes and our subcodes from our qualitative information, and we'll have that information already through our action research organizer, through our data analysis section. So just to read this real quick, so in my write-up, I'm talking about how our 70 teachers in this example said that they're using transition assessments on a monthly basis, right? And that number of responses is for the entire group of teachers that responded. So 34 said that they're doing it on a monthly basis, and that's about 48, almost half the sample had said that they're doing it on a monthly basis. And then I broke it down from the highest to lowest, so 48%, 30, 14, and 7% there. And then I followed that up with an explanation of my multiple ranking grid results. You notice here that I've only hit or only presented the key information. The goal when you're doing this write-up is to not talk about all of your results. This is action research and applied research, so we're only focused on providing to our fellow staff and practitioners what they need to know right now, what's most useful for them, what's most actionable for them, what's most practical. Providing all of the results for all of your tests and all of your analyses is not practical for them, because our idea is that we give them exactly what they need to know in order to do something to improve transition practices that are happening right now, specifically whatever evidence-based practices you're investigating as part of your problem in practice. So going back to our example here, you see that I have our write-up of our bar chart, of our ranking chart, and our multiple grid ranking chart. And then I follow that up with a summary of the qualitative information. What I'm not doing is providing a list of codes of my major and minor codes. What I'm doing is summarizing those codes that I had found. So here you see that I said when asked to explain their experiences in implementing these types of transition assessments, teachers talked about difficulty with accessing training materials and professional development opportunities on tools and methods of transition assessment, particularly these assessments as part of the general curriculum. So you see here in my example, and what you'll likely find in your study is that when you're seeing an area of big need in your quantitative information, in your qualitative information, your participants are going to be talking about that. They might be talking about their challenges with it or what they'd like to see happen to support them better to overcome those challenges. All right, so once you have your integrated analysis complete, where you've combined and contrast your qualitative and your quantitative data together to identify your key themes across those 4 big domains, your next step is to work in your action research organizer in section 2.5 to develop recommendations to improve these evidence-based practices. So you're going to focus on 5 specific areas in order to develop your recommendations for practice. First is focus, where based upon your major themes, you're going to identify which specific evidence-based practices you want to focus on. Then, with that practice in mind, you're going to talk about the actions or activities that you recommend that could be done to address that practice. Be as specific as possible. The idea being that someone should be able to read that and have a full understanding of not only what the activity or action would be, but how to implement it as well. So if we can't answer exactly and fully what will be done, who's going to do it, and how, then we haven't met the criteria for our second part of action. Once we've done that, we're going to look at resources, so knowledge, skills, tools, opportunities, and partnerships that are needed to implement those specific activities or actions to improve that evidence-based practice. Then we'll focus on the outcomes of those activities and the resources we're going to draw upon to make them happen. Finally, we'll think about any collaborators, so stakeholders, particularly key stakeholders or power holders in your agency, your community, your school, your district, your program, your organization that need to have a direct hand in some aspect of these actions or activities. So these are the individuals who may have a specific knowledge base, they may have the authority, whatever that may be. These are the people that are going to be critical to actually realizing and making those actions or activities happen.